I am staring at footage from Texas right now, and I have to tell you something. I've covered a lot of stories over the past few years, a lot of protests, a lot of government overreach. But what I'm watching unfold in Texas has me genuinely frightened in a way I haven't felt before. And I think by the time we were done here, you're going to understand why this moment is different, why this crosses a line we can come back from. This is my analysis. I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. Let me set the scene for you because the details matter here. Hundreds of people showed up outside the Dilley Detention Center in South Texas, not to storm the facility, not to break anyone out. They showed up to peacefully protest, to show support for a 5-year-old boy named Liam. And what happened next should terrify every single American, regardless of how you feel about immigration policy. Donald Trump's ICE agents, backed by Texas state troopers, attacked these peaceful protesters with tear gas, pepper spray, and rubber bullets. CNN captured it live. Democratic Congress members were there, lawyers were there, families were there, and they got tear gassed for exercising their First Amendment rights on American soil. Now, before we go any further, I need to tell you about Liam, because Liam is the reason those protesters were there. And Liam S.'s story reveals something much darker about what is really happening across this country right now. Liam is 5 years old. 5. He is from Ecuador, and ICE used him as bait. Let me say that again, because it is so disturbing I want to make sure you heard it. ICE agents used a 5-year-old child as bait to lure his father outside, then kidnapped both of them in Minnesota and flew them to this detention center in Texas. There's video of this. Liam wearing his little blue hat, being used as a pawn in what ICE is calling immigration enforcement, and now Liam is sick. Multiple reports say his health is deteriorating inside that detention center. A 5-year-old boy ripped from his community, used as bait, flown across the country, and now getting sicker by the day in what amounts to a concentration camp. I know that term makes people uncomfortable. Concentration camp. But I'm going to use it because when you listen to the audio from inside that facility, when you hear the screaming, when you hear people begging for help, when you see how they redressed in matching outfits like the Squid Games, what else do you call it? A lawyer was able to record audio before being kicked out of the facility. You can hear the screams behind the walls. People yelling, "Help us, let us out, they reharming us." In America, in 2026, in Texas, and when Americans showed up to peacefully protest this treatment of a 5-year-old child, ICE attacked them. Here is what I think is happening, and I want you to follow this logic with me because I spent 3 days reading through 1,200 comments on the original coverage of this, and a pattern emerged that I don't think most people are seeing yet. This isn't about immigration enforcement. Not really. I believe what we're re-witnessing is the systematic testing of how much force the Trump regime can deploy against American citizens before we fight back. And I think Texas was chosen very deliberately for the next phase of this test. Think about it. They started in Minnesota, liberal state, killed 2 American citizens, Renee Good and Alex Pretty, shot them for the crime of being near ICE operations, not interfering, just nearby. And they tested the response. The response was massive protests, thousands of Minnesotans in the streets, Governor Tim Walz pushing back, the state filing lawsuits, but no widespread armed resistance despite Minnesota allowing concealed carry. The test in Minnesota revealed that Americans, even when their fellow citizens are murdered by federal agents, will mostly protest peacefully. So now they in Texas. And if you know anything about Texas, you know this is a very different kind of test. Texas has open carry laws. Texans are heavily armed. Texans have a deeply rooted cultural identity around not being pushed around by the federal government. The Alamo Eisen-T, just history in Texas. It mythology. It identity. And yet, ICE rolled into Texas, attacked peaceful protesters outside a detention center holding a sick 5-year-old boy. And so far, Texans are still protesting peacefully. I think that's exactly what Trump and Stephen Miller are testing. How far can we push before Americans start shooting back? And what happens when they do? Because here's the thing that keeps me up at night. I don't think this regime fears armed resistance. I think they were trying to provoke it. Let me explain my reasoning, and you can decide if I am being paranoid or if I am seeing something real. If protesters in Texas start shooting at ICE agents, what happens? Martial law? National emergency, suspension of elections, the whole Project 2025 playbook gets deployed overnight, justified by armed insurrection against federal law enforcement. But if Texans Dante shoot back, even when being tear-gassed for peacefully protesting, then the regime learns they can do absolutely anything to American citizens without triggering the armed resistance they claim to fear from Second Amendment advocates. It's a win-win for authoritarians. Either we fight back and they declare martial law, or we don't fight back and they know we won T. Now, I want to acknowledge something here because I read through all 1,200 comments, and there were people making points I need to address honestly. Some people said, look, if the Biden administration hadn't mismanaged the border, if Kamala Harris had done her job, we wouldn't be in this situation. Trump wouldn't have this opening. And you know what? There's some truth to that. I believe the Biden administration dropped the ball on immigration policy. I think the border situation became untenable, and that created political space for Trump to come in with his sledgehammer approach. But here's where I disagree with that analysis. Bad border policy doesn't justify using 5-year-olds as bait. Mismanaged immigration doesn't justify shooting American citizens who aren't even interfering with ICE operations. Policy failures don't justify turning ICE into a paramilitary force that attacks peaceful protesters. There's a difference between saying we need better immigration enforcement and saying we should accept concentration camps and dead Americans as the solution. And here's what really gets me. About 40% of the comments I read pointed out something that mainstream media is barely covering. ICE isn't actually focusing on immigration enforcement right now. They are focusing on suppressing dissent. One commenter from Minnesota laid out the evidence systematically, and I want to walk through it because it's damning. They pointed out that ICE has dedicated 3 agents to suppress protests for every 1 agent actually enforcing immigration policy. 3-to-1, ICE is setting up roadblocks outside grocery stores in white neighborhoods, not at job sites employing undocumented workers. They following local law enforcement home and demanding to see papers from American cops. They showing up at elementary schools, cataloging children by perceived ethnicity, not deporting anyone, just creating lists. Meanwhile, companies along the Minnesota River that employ hundreds of undocumented workers, companies that are GOP campaign donors, haven't been raided once. Not once. You want to know why? Because this was never about immigration enforcement. It's about establishing a climate of fear, testing the limits of what Americans will tolerate, building infrastructure for political repression. And the detained people, including 5-year-old Liam, are props in that larger operation. I know that sounds harsh, but look at the evidence. Why use a 5-year-old as bait when the father wasn't evading immigration enforcement? Why fly them from Minnesota to Texas instead of processing them locally? Why attack peaceful protesters outside the detention center? None of this makes sense as immigration policy. All of it makes perfect sense as authoritarian theater designed to terrify people into submission. And it's working on some people. I saw comments from folks saying, I am scared to protest now. I don't want to get tear-gassed. I don't want to get shot. I have kids to think about. I understand that fear completely. It's rational. ICE has killed 2 Americans already. They reusing chemical weapons on peaceful protesters. The risk is real. But I also saw something else in those comments that gives me hope. I saw Texans saying, you picked the wrong state. I saw Canadians and Australians saying, we stand with you. I saw people making plans for the next No Kings protest on March 28th. And I saw something that really struck me. About 8% of comments came from international observers expressing shock and disappointment that America has fallen this far, this fast. One person from Australia wrote, I am 68 years old. I was raised on American cowboy movies and war movies where Americans were brave, gun-toting people who did what needed to be done. Where are these people? Was it a sham all this time? That hit me hard, because I think they were asking the question a lot of us are asking ourselves. Who are we really? Are we the people who stand up to tyranny, or are we the people who watch it happen? Here's what I think, and this is just my opinion, but I am pretty convinced of it. We are at a decision point as a country, not in some abstract future sense, right now, this week. The Trump regime has killed American citizens, used children as bait, attacked peaceful protesters, and threatened state governments who push back. They've compared American states to Venezuela and talked about how successful their operations were in a foreign country using the same language they use about American cities. Think about that. Donald Trump told Governor Walz that the operation in Minnesota looks just like the operation in Venezuela. An American president talking about American citizens the same way he talks about regime change operations in foreign countries. Either we accept this as the new normal or we don T. There's no middle ground left. And I want to be really clear about what accepting it means, because I don't think everyone has thought through the implications. If we accept that ICE can kill Americans without consequences, we re-accepting that federal agents can kill anyone they want. If we accept that 5-year-olds can be used as bait and detained until they get sick, we are accepting that there are no limits on cruelty. If we accept that peaceful protest gets you tear-gassed, we re-accepting that the First Amendment is dead. Once those precedents are set, they don't get unset. This is the new floor, and I believe, based on historical patterns, that floor keeps dropping until something stops it. Now, I'm not saying I know exactly what that something should be. I'm not calling for violence. I actually think that exactly what they want, for reasons I explained earlier. But I am saying that peaceful resistance has to escalate and sustain, has to become too big to ignore, too persistent to wait out, too widespread to suppress. The No Kings movement understands this. I spoke with Joel Payne from Move On, and they reorganizing No Kings 3 for March 28th. They rebuilding protest infrastructure in every county in America. They retraining people in peaceful protest tactics and safety measures. And here is what I think is really significant about that. Move On, Indivisible, all these organizations that are actually organizing real protests, they not trying to be the leaders. They trying to be the infrastructure that allows leaderless movements to succeed, because that is the only kind of movement that can be decapitated. You can arrest the leader of a leaderless movement. You can intimidate the spokesperson when there are thousands of spokespeople, but movements need infrastructure. They need websites where people can find local protests. They need training on how to stay safe when IC attacks. They need legal support when people get arrested. They need medical support when people get tear-gassed. That's what these organizations provide. And I think it's worth supporting them, not because they are perfect, but because they rebuilding the capacity for sustained resistance. Okay, I want to shift gears for a minute and talk about something specific that I think is being overlooked in the coverage of Texas. The state troopers attacking protesters weren't federal agents. They were Texas state troopers, ordered by Governor Abbott. Let that sink in. In Minnesota, it was federal ICE agents killing Americans and attacking protesters. In Texas, the state government is collaborating with the federal government to suppress peaceful protest. This is significant because it shows that Republican governors in red states aren't going to protect their citizens from federal overreach. Even in Texas, which has an entire mythology built around resisting federal power, the state government sided with ICE against peaceful protesters. And I think this is waking people up in red states in a way that Minnesota didn't. Because Minnesota is blue. Trump voters could tell themselves, well, that's what you get in a liberal state. But Texas is supposed to be different. One commenter wrote something that really captured this. They said, lots more going on than just the dump regime ruining everything it touches. Any magats are being noted and time is running out. Time is running out. I think that's right. I think we are in a very compressed timeline now where decisions made in the next few weeks will determine what country we live in for the next generation. And I keep coming back to Liam, this 5-year-old boy who is sick in a detention center in Texas, used as bait, torn from his community, denied adequate medical care according to multiple reports. If we can protect a 5-year-old child from being used as a political pawn and detained until he gets sick, what can we protect? What line do we allow them to cross? I don't have kids, but a lot of you watching this do. And I want you to imagine for a second that it's your 5-year-old in that detention center, your child being used as bait, your child getting sicker by the day, your child screaming, help us behind those walls. What would you want other Americans to do? Would you want them to shrug and say, well, immigration is complicated? Would you want them to stay home because protest is uncomfortable? Or would you want them in the streets demanding your child's release? I think the answer is obvious. And I think that's why people showed up in Texas. Not because they are all immigration activists, not because they have some sophisticated policy position, but because using a 5-year-old as bait and detaining him until he gets sick is wrong. Obviously, undeniably wrong. And when Americans peacefully protested that obvious wrong, they got attacked by state and federal agents working together. This is the regime's fundamental miscalculation in my view. They think brutality will intimidate people into submission, and maybe it will for some people. Fear is a powerful tool, but for others, and I saw this over and over in the comments, brutality is radicalizing. Every protest they attack creates more protesters. Every American they kill creates more resistance. Every child they harm makes more people willing to risk getting tear-gassed. One person commented, "Protesters always win." And historically, that's often true. Authoritarian regimes can suppress protest temporarily, but sustained, peaceful resistance tends to win in the long run. Not always, not easily, but often enough to give me hope. Of course, the regime knows this too, which is why I think they were trying to provoke violence. Because violent resistance is much easier to suppress than peaceful resistance. Easier to justify crackdowns. Easier to turn public opinion, so we were in this very delicate moment where the resistance has to be massive enough to matter, sustained enough to outlast them, but disciplined enough not to give them the excuse they're looking for. I don't know if we can pull that off. Maybe I'm asking for something impossible. Massive, sustained, disciplined, peaceful resistance against a regime that's killing people and using children as bait. But I think it's our only shot. Because the alternatives are either surrender to authoritarianism or civil war. And neither of those outcomes is acceptable. Let me tell you what I'm personally going to do, and then you can decide what you were going to do. I am marking March 28th on my calendar. I am finding my local No Kings protest at nokings.org. I am going to be there peacefully protesting. And I am going to keep covering these stories, keep amplifying the voices of people resisting, keep connecting the dots between what's happening in Minnesota and Texas and what's coming next. Because I believe this is the most important story in America right now. Not the tariffs, not the cabinet drama, not the culture war distractions, the systematic testing of how much force can be deployed against American citizens before we stop accepting it. And I believe Liam, this 5-year-old boy sick in a Texas detention center, represents the moral test of our generation. Can we protect the most vulnerable among us, or can we? The Trump regime is betting we can. They were betting that we'll argue about immigration policy while they use children as bait. They were betting we'll stay home because we were scared of getting tear-gassed. They were betting we'll accept murdered Americans as the cost of border security. I think they were wrong. I think they've miscalculated. I think there are millions of Americans who draw the line at using 5-year-olds as bait, who draw the line at killing American citizens, who draw the line at attacking peaceful protesters. But thinking they are wrong isn't enough. We have to prove they are wrong. In the streets, on March 28th and every day between now and then. I want to share one more thing before we wrap up, because I think it's important context for understanding what's really at stake. Governor Walz told a story about his phone call with Trump, and what Trump said should chill everyone. Trump told Walz that the operation in Minnesota was successful, just like the operation in Venezuela. Venezuela, a foreign country where the U.S. conducted regime change operations. Trump sees no difference between a foreign nation and an American state, no difference between enemies abroad and citizens at home, no difference between regime change and governing, that who's giving the orders to IC. Someone who thinks Minnesota and Venezuela are the same kind of problem requiring the same kind of solution. And the solution in Venezuela involved, according to one podcaster with military connections that I can independently verify, sonic weapons and microwave bursts that killed and permanently injured over 500 people. I can confirm that claim, but I can confirm that Trump told Walz the Venezuela operation was successful and compared it favorably to what's happening in Minnesota. Make of that what you will, but it doesn't to suggest someone interested in proportional law enforcement or protecting American citizens. Here's my bottom line, and then I want to hear from you in the comments. I believe we rewatching the end of something or the beginning of something. The end of American democracy as we knew it, or the beginning of a resistance movement powerful enough to save it. I don't think there's a middle path anymore. The regime has killed Americans, used children as bait, attacked peaceful protesters, and promised more of the same in every state. Either we accept that as the new normal and figure out how to live under authoritarian rule, or we resist it with everything we have through sustained peaceful protest and civil disobedience. I choose resistance. Peaceful, sustained, disciplined resistance. In the streets on March 28th. In my community organizing with neighbors. In my work amplifying these stories so people can pretend they don't know what is happening. You have to choose too. Everybody watching this has to choose, because neutrality isn't actually neutral when one side is killing Americans and using 5-year-olds as bait. Not choosing is choosing. Staying silent is speaking. Doing nothing is doing something. And in 10 years, when your kids or grandkids ask you what you did when America faced this test, what are you going to tell them? I want to be able to say, I was in the streets. I was using whatever platform I had to tell the truth. I was standing with the people trying to protect 5-year-old Liam and all the other Liams being used as pawns in someone else's authoritarian fantasy. Maybe I'm wrong about all of this. Maybe I am being hysterical. Maybe this is all just tough immigration enforcement and I am overreacting. But I don't think so. I think we're watching something much darker unfold, and I think the time to stop it is right now before it becomes unstoppable. Get to knowkings.org. Find your local protest. Show up on March 28th. Bring your friends, your family, your neighbors. Be peaceful, be disciplined, be sustained. And if you can protest for whatever reason, support those who can. Donate to bail funds. Share these stories. Call your representatives. Do something, because I genuinely believe this is it. This is the moment we'll look back on as the turning point, when we either stood up or didn't tee, when we protected children like Liam or didn't tee, when we defended the First Amendment or watched it die. Choose, and then act on your choice. I'll see you in the streets, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll keep tracking this story as it unfolds. Stay strong, stay